All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today we're doing a bit of a recap on some of the incredibly strange elements we've all just accepted as totally normal in Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. I mean, we're talking about a narrative that is literally built on childhood lies, historical hoaxes, a secret that is physically impossible to keep, fires with perfectly tailored consequences, and, oh yeah, let's not forget, con man heroes. For generations, readers have swallowed these elements whole, right? Mostly just because of the book's untouchable reputation. But today, we're zooming in. We are going to put this beloved story on trial.
And that brings us to the really big, central question we have to ask ourselves. What is Jane Eyre, really? You know, when you strip away all those sweeping romanticized movie adaptations and the hushed reverence of high school English classes, what are you actually left with? Is it the absolute pinnacle of realistic romance, or is it something entirely different? It's time to challenge our preconceived notions and figure out what this revered novel actually is.
To answer that, we have to start at the foundation with Section 1, Clumsy Craft and Melodrama. Before we even get to the plot, we really need to look at the mechanics of the writing itself. The text is surprisingly redundant, and honestly, the emotional dialogue heavily betrays the author's complete lack of real-world romantic experience. Just imagine the brooding, supposedly worldly Edward Rochester declaring, you strange, you almost unearthly thing, I love you as my own life. It's incredibly melodramatic. It's vocally unnatural. It's this clunky, highly theatrical dialogue masquerading as raw human passion.
And then, well, we get Jane's response. She looks at him and says, "You are good, so generous. Why do you do this for me? I mean, I have to ask you, is this how real people actually speak? Think about your own relationships for a second. Do you talk to your partner like there's some kind of deity bestowing alms upon you? No, of course not. This is exactly how a novelist imagines people speak when they're just purely guessing at how romance works."
What's really fascinating here is the stark contrast between historical reality and Bronte's invented caricature. A genuine 19th century gentleman was expected to possess a calm dignity, right? He was meant to be this figure of immense restraint. Rochester, on the other hand, talks like a runaway river. I mean, the guy speaks for pages, literal pages. Jane can barely get a single word in edgewise. The author didn't know many men, so she essentially just invented how she thought a passionate man was supposed to sound. She created a total caricature rather than an actual character.
And that clumsy dialogue spills right over into Section 2, Systemic Logical Collapse.
Because, you see, the clumsy dialogue is really just the tip of the iceberg. The world building itself is entirely broken. The words they say are one thing, but the things that happen in the world around them are entirely another. Just consider this rapid-fire list of absurd conveniences. We are supposed to just politely believe that a mad woman was hidden perfectly in a house for 15 years. A fiercely loyal dog mysteriously decides not to bark at a stranger right when the plot requires absolute silence. A literal psychic call miraculously travels 50 miles across the English countryside, and a devastating fire just happens to result in prescribed, highly specific injuries that neatly resolve all the messy romantic complications. Folks, this is not coincidence. The author replaces reality and probability with narrative necessity. She writes events not because they logically would happen, but because she desperately needs them to happen to move her plot forward.
But the cracks actually go deeper than just the plot, leading us to Section 3, Toxic Ideology.
We have to pivot here from structural cracks to downright moral rot. We're talking about the deeply toxic belief systems woven so seamlessly into this narrative that we've been conditioned to just accept them as romantic. Let's start by totally subverting the standard definition of a victim. In the novel's framing, Edward Rochester is presented as this tragic victim of circumstance. But let's look at the cold hard facts. He is a con man. He is a liar. He is literally a bigamist in waiting, actively trying to trick a young woman into a false marriage. Yet somehow, the novel completely manipulates us into viewing this literal criminal as a sympathetic figure, glorifying him and aggressively telling the reader that he deserves happiness.
And honestly, it gets even wilder when you look at the flip side of that manipulation, the novel's framing of a hero. Who are the moral paragons in Jane's world? Well, you have Helen Burns, who is essentially a brainwashed child completely glorified for accepting horrific abuse. Or, even worse, St. John Rivers. The book frames him as this noble, heroic figure, but in reality, he is a spiritual terrorist using the psychological threat of eternal hellfire to coerce a woman into marriage. This glorification of religious fanaticism fully exposes how the book frames deeply harmful coercive behavior as noble. Make no mistake, this isn't harmless romance, it is incredibly toxic.
So why does the book operate this way? Let's zoom out for Section 4,
a narrow historical limitation. To really understand this, let's travel back to the year 1847 for a second and look at just how amazingly small and conservative Bronte's universe actually is. At the exact same time she's writing, you've got Victor Hugo over in France writing Les Miserables, asking these massive, profound questions about justice and mercy. Honoré de Balzac is writing The Human Comedy, brilliantly dissecting how greed and power work in society. Leo Tolstoy is over there crafting War and Peace, exploring how tiny individuals shape grand, sweeping history. And Bronte? Bronte is asking, can the plain governess marry the rich gentleman? Her religious vision is distinctly medieval. Her moral universe is purely ledger-based. It is a world that is small, deeply conservative, and frankly terrified of change when you compare it to the grand societal questions being tackled by the other literary giants of her era. Which finally brings us to Section 5, the verdict, a negative example.
We really need to redefine what it actually means to call this specific book a classic today. Because look, if a classic means a work of profound philosophical thought, genuinely realistic characters, and rock-solid logical plotting, well, Jane Eyre kind of fails that test. Ultimately, what we are looking at is a beautiful fairy tale masquerading as reality. We absolutely have to acknowledge that while the story is undeniably beautifully told, it is fundamentally manipulative. It constructs a victim narrative out of absolutely thin air and disguises a selfish, deceitful criminal as a dashing romantic hero. It's a classic, sure, because it has deeply shaped the imagination of generations, but it really serves as a negative example. It's a story we desperately wish to believe, but not one that reflects anything true or healthy about the real world.
Because the task of literary analysis isn't to just blindly worship the past, right? Or to use the word classic as some sort of impenetrable shield to deflect all criticism. A classic of its era is often just a prisoner of that exact same era. So I'll leave you with this stark challenge. Do not kneel before the idol. Read carefully. Think critically about the underlying ideology you're absorbing, and always, always question. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer.